We are live, ladies and gentlemen. You're once again welcome to the King Dems Podcast. And today I have with me a returnee based on popular demand, a highly appreciated cerebral scholar, a genius in our own time. Please make welcome with me, Jim Marshall. How are you today, Jim?
Hi, Dems. Good to see you.
Like I said, you're highly appreciated. And I was telling you before the beginning of the pod, my father actually very much appreciates you. And he seldom ever comments on anything. But this one, he commented and did not just comment. He called me and I saw his comments and I have to read this for you and for the viewers. He doesn't know you, right? But he was able to connect with, your body of work and the way you broke it down in the most simplicity or forms. And for me, I'm very grateful for that. So he says the guy is highly cerebral, loaded with wisdom and ideas. No doubt he is a blessing to humanity. And of course, something that struck me on the call he made to me was he said something, and I quote, that guy has cemented his name on the sands of time. His body of work is going to be highly researched, highly utilized. And, his place is among the Albert Einsteins, the Abraham Maslows of this world. And for me, I was actually very humbled and very grateful to have actually met you, for our paths to have crossed. And of course, once again, I'm saying a very big thank you to you for this, great service to humanity that you have actually done by way of your work. And today we are grateful to have you, on the podcast to break down into a more granular form the concept of septimics. That is the hierarchies of human phenomena, the analysis, prediction, and management of human affairs. And permit me to make a presentation of your slides. Here we go. Are you able to see the slides now?
Yeah, I can see it. Well, thanks, Den. Tell your dad he did a good job in raising his son, and I hope he'll read the book because his life will
Thank
get
you.
better if he does.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
So let me talk about this slide. So on the left side, you see there this seven-pointed star. That is the Septimics logo. It tells you a lot about Septimics. It is a seven-pointed star. Septem in Latin means seven. And Septimics is a collection of scales, each of which has seven levels. Each of these seven levels is obviously different from all the others. So you have these seven stars. Each ray points in a different direction and is a different color. But between them, if you look at it, it makes a spectrum. It goes right around the rainbow if you follow it around. So that's the logo, and it tells you what the subject is. So as you said, it's called Septimics, Hierarchies of Human Phenomena, Analysis, Prediction, and Management of Human Affairs. And that is what this book is like.
Oh,
So if we
wow.
could advance to the next slide.
I was going to ask a question. Why the
Oh, go
number
ahead.
seven? Why the number seven? Because I am quite, a man of faith, and growing up in Bible school, they attribute, certain numbers with certain phenomena in the Bible, and
Yes.
the number seven is attributed to perfection in the Bible. So
Yes.
this is sort of a perfect body of work. But if I may ask, I'm quite curious, why the
Sure.
number seven?
Well, the largest section of the book is called Introduction to Septimics. And there is a section in it called Why 7,
Oh,
where
wow.
I explain why
Interested.
7.
So my question is actually answered already. So I can't
Yes.
wait to move to the next slide.
And so let me tell you, viewers, the Introduction to Septimics is on my website. So if you go to septimics.com and open Introduction to Septimics, you can scroll down and see where it says why 7. And I tell you exactly why 7. It's a mathematical explanation.
Okay.
Okay, so now we're talking about individual scales. And this is the first of the individual scales. So there are 35 septimic scales. 24 of them are individual scales, meaning they apply to an individual. And
Okay.
11 of them are group scales, which mean they apply to a group. So we're now talking about scales that apply to an individual. So the most important of these, which is why it comes first in the book, is the scale of basic purposes. The most important thing to know about anyone is what is his basic purpose, because that is what the person is trying to do all the time, whether he's successful or not. When you find your level on the scale, it is a life-changing moment because it clarifies your whole life, going back and forward. Because what happens is once you know what level you're at, you throw out the other 6 levels, and you can then consciously live at the level you've been at all your life, but you now know what it is. So this is very valuable and important. I should tell you, this is also what I call a persistent trait. Most people live an entire life at one level of the scale. I'm not saying it's impossible to move on the scale. I'm just saying it's rare. I would say easily 90% of people live a whole life at one level. It takes something really big to either move you up to the next level or down to the lower level, and I'll tell you exactly why. If you look on the left, when I say type, I give the 7 types, and next to each of those words is either a plus sign or a minus sign. See that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, the plus sign and minus sign does not mean good or bad. It means inflow or outflow. Now, if you want to express this relative to human beings, it would make more sense to say reach or withdraw. So when a person reaches for something, that's an outflow. When a person withdraws from something, that's an inflow. So when you're talking about physical science, like, for example, electricity, well, the electricity in your wall is alternating current. I don't know what it is in England, but here it's 60 cycles per second, which means every 60th of a second, the polarity reverses. It's running one way, and then after a 60th of a second, it runs the other way. Now, of course, to electricity, 60th of a second is a long time because we're talking about something on the order of the speed of light. So the saint is on an inflow, or you might say he's withdrawing. So
I see. So by the way, in England, it's 50.
Okay.
50 hertz per
idea.
second. Yeah.
So you see, a saint is somebody who's withdrawing from society. He's not reaching into it, he's withdrawing from it. As opposed to a leader, which is level 2, he's reaching into society, not withdrawing from it. And that's true for all the 7 levels. Now, this is why it's not easy to change level on this, because changing level requires the person to reverse his polarity. Now, this idea of a person reversing polarity has existed for probably thousands of years in Oriental philosophy. That a person has a polarity, and when you have a big change in somebody's life, he's reversing polarity. Well, from a septemic point of view, we would say he changed level. He went to another level. Now, whether it's going up or going down, obviously is a big difference. But let's say you're at level 2 and you have some big transformational benefit. You might move up to level 1. But on the other hand, if you're at level 2 and you have some horrible traumatic experience, it might knock you down to level 3. So one of the axioms of Septimics is that you can only move to an adjacent level. It's impossible to skip a level. And I've been working with this material most of my life, and trust me, that's true. That is a benefit to you because once you find the level for either yourself or another, you know If he's going to improve, what he's going to go up to, and if he's going to deteriorate, what he's going to go down to. In other words, it's very specific. So if a person is at level 2, leader, and he has some big beneficial transformational occurrence, he could move up to level 1. Now he's not a leader anymore. He's a saint. He is not outflowing. He's inflowing. This helps you to determine what level a person is at. Because if you watch the person, you can see if he's inflowing or outflowing. For example, Abraham Lincoln was a leader. He was at level 2. If you study the man, particularly during his presidency, he was clearly outflowing. He was not withdrawing at all. As opposed to Jesus of Nazareth, he was at level 1, saint. He was about transcendence. He was always saying, I will go to the Father, meaning I'll go to heaven. So he was withdrawing from the world. Now, when you meet these people and you spot their levels, you can see this. So I've known some people who are saints. It was obvious to me that these people were withdrawing from the world. I knew a few Catholic priests. From among the many that I knew 3 who were saints. And this is not subtle. I mean, if you didn't know this book, you would look at it and you say, there's something different about this guy. Well, now I'm telling you what it was. His basic purpose was to transcend. And I had the benefit of knowing these people. It was a very pleasant experience. And it helped me. As opposed to, if you have somebody who's at level 2 and he deteriorates, he goes down to 3, he becomes a winner. Now, at level 2, the person is trying to conquer. That is his objective, to conquer. Well, look at Abraham Lincoln. He was determined to conquer the Confederacy. This is not a subtle point. And he had a lot of trouble getting help because most of the people around him were not at the same level. He was at a higher level than the people in his cabinet and most of his generals. So he had a lot of trouble getting them to conquer the Confederacy until he found an obscure general named Grant, who was willing to fight, and Grant's friend Sherman. Those 2 generals won the war for Lincoln. Without them, the North probably would have lost the war because the people in the North were not enthused about this. They were not enthused about sending their sons off to be killed because 500,000 people were killed in this war, and that was a significant proportion of the population at that time. So almost everybody knew somebody who was killed in that war in the United States. And so when it was not going well because because Lincoln couldn't find people to fight, the South was doing okay. They were holding their own. And probably what would have happened if Grant and Sherman hadn't come along is the South would have succeeded in seceding from the Union. It would have broken up the United States. So that's a little bit about this. Now, notice up top it says type linear quantum general. Every scale is either linear or spiral. A linear scale, such as this one, it goes in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, as you would expect. But there is such a thing as a spiral scale, in which 1 connects to 7. So it's a different graph. It's a different mechanism. It's not just a straight line. It's a spiral. And when you come to a spiral scale, it will say spiral. Or, I'm forgetting the other word. The opposite of quantum is, because I want to give the same word that I use in the book. Gradual. It's either quantum or gradual. Now, here's what that means. In a quantum scale, there's nothing between the levels. In other words, you are either at level 1 or you are at level 2. There's nothing in between those levels. Nothing. It's like intergalactic space. There's nothing there. As opposed to, in a gradual scale, there is an infinitude of gradations. So in a gradual scale, you move from level to level, little by little. But in a quantum scale, you leap instantaneously from one level to the next. So when a person changes on this scale, that change, which is a reversal of polarity, occurs in perhaps a nanosecond. It's virtually instantaneous, or perhaps it even is actually instantaneous. We can't really determine that. But you should think of it as being instantaneous because for all intents and purposes, that's what it is. So person is at leader, he's at leader, and a billionth of a second later, he's at saint. Poof, just like that. There's no gradation. On the gradual scales, that's more what people expect. You move little by little. Now, this is a general scale. Every scale is either general or specific. Now, in a general scale, once you find your level on that scale or another person's level on that scale, you're done. So, for example, if you were to find that you are at, let's say, level 3, for you, that's it for this scale. Now, you can try to improve yourself by going up to level 2, but it's not context-driven. A specific scale is context-driven, meaning you have to have a context for it to make sense. So you'll see most of the scales are specific scales. And when we get to those, you'll see it'll say specific. And then you have to have a context. Like in our last discussion, we talked about the scale of motivation. That has to have a context. So we can say, what is your motivation toward your mother? That's a different context from what is your motivation toward your father. Okay, it's specific. There's a potential infinitude of ways you can use it. Whereas on a general scale, you find your level and you're done, or you find your wife's level and you're done. Although when I say you're done, as far as finding, there's not going to be any more finding. It's not based on a context. You are at that level or you're at some other level, period. Okay? And notice it says this scale aligns with the scale of life spheres. See Book 2, Chapter 2. So all of the individual scales are collected in what I call Book 1, and all of the group scales are collected in what I call Book 2. Chapter 2 of Book 2 is the scale of life spheres. That's a completely different scale. I don't want to go into it now because I want to finish explaining the scale of basic purposes. The point is that these scales align. There is some lateral alignment between these two, and I discussed it in the chapter, how it's true. So realize that this is one of several scales in which there is an individual manifestation and a group manifestation. So what I mean by that is the scale of basic purposes is for an individual. It doesn't apply to a group. But the scale of life spheres is about groups. So the corresponding scale for the scale of basic purposes in the groups is life spheres. So these two sort of fit together like this, where you have these 7 that align. So that's what that means. Now, notice under type, I give the 7 types. And these are the names. Starting at the bottom, subversive is the lowest. Then it comes up to criminal, then loser, then normal, then winner, then leader, then saint. And the corresponding plus or minus tells you that the saint, the winner, the loser, and the subversive are inflowing. You can see this in the person. For example, the loser. The loser is withdrawn. That's why he's a loser. He's pulling in defeat upon himself. He's not reaching out into the society, as opposed to the normal. A normal person reaches out into society. Okay? Now, the winner is inflowing, and what that means is he's feathering his nest. He's collecting riches for himself because his objective is wealth. See, the person at level 4, he wants to fit in. That's why his objective is conformity. But the person at level 3, he's not content to fit in. He wants to own mansions, limousines, yachts, 747 jets, so forth. He wants wealth. That's a very different type of a person. So let me go on to the next category and tell you the objectives of these people, because this gets down to what this is about. The objective of the saint is transcendence. The saint is not interested in riches, in wealth, in adulation. He's not interested in fame. He's interested in transcending. Now, how he articulates that depends on his belief system. If he's a Buddhist, he'll say he wants to attain nirvana. If he's a Christian, he'll say he wants to go to heaven. See, that's his idea of transcendence. That's the word he uses. But they're both saints. So whatever religion you're in, if you are a saint in that religion, it means you want to transcend. So, for example, Jesus of Nazareth, he wanted to transcend. It's perfectly obvious from studying the Gospels that that's what he was about. He didn't want riches. He didn't want to conquer anything. And so a lot of people did not understand that. If the Romans had understood that, they wouldn't have executed him, because they would have realized that he posed no threat to them, because he was not interested in undermining them. He didn't care about gold or conquering anything. He wanted to transcend. Now, the next one down, the leader, his goal is conquest. Now, many people say, well, gee, that's not a good thing. And I say, oh, really? It depends on whose ox is being gored. When the United States conquered the Axis powers in 1945, that was, for almost everyone on Earth, a good thing. Even for the Japanese and the Germans and the Italians who got conquered, they did much better after we got those crazy people out of their governments. So we got Tojo out of the Japanese government. We got Mussolini out of the Italian government, although he had already been killed by the communists. And we got Hitler out. So we got those people out, and those crazy leaders enable those countries to do well, to not follow a horrible path, which led them into World War II. So conquest is a question of whose ox is being gored. I mean, if some guy breaks into my house in the middle of the night, and I don't know who this person is, and he's got a weapon and he tries to rob me, and I get out my gun and defend myself, I'm conquering that guy, am I not?
Oh, definitely.
That's lawful. In every jurisdiction that I know of, that's self-defense. There's a whole body of law called castle law. When somebody comes into your castle, you are permitted to defend yourself. If he's out on the lawn, that doesn't count. He has to come in the house, and he has to pose a threat to you. Now, if you pull a gun on him and say, get out of my house, and he runs away, that's fine. But if he runs away and you shoot him in the back, that's not conquest, that's murder. So conquest has a meaning. Now, this was a word I pondered for years to try to get what is the best word, and that's the word I settled on. Nobody else has ever suggested another word to explain the leader. Because, for example, Winston Churchill was at this level. Well, he was interested in conquering Hitler, wasn't he? If Churchill had not become prime minister, the English would have surrendered. From a scholarly appreciation of World War II, I can tell you most scholars realize that, because the Germans did not want to conquer the English. They did not attack the English. The English attacked them because they had attacked Poland. The Hitler liked the British. He had nothing against the British Empire. The empire could have continued if they had made peace with the Germans. But Churchill had been saying for almost 10 years, we must conquer Hitler. He saw him as a threat. And when he took over, listen to his speeches. We will never surrender was his famous statement. And he inspired the English people to conquer the Nazis. If Chamberlain, who was the previous prime minister, had stayed in there, that wouldn't have happened, because there were many attempts by the Nazis to make peace with the English. And if Chamberlain had been in there, he would have said, okay, let's talk about it. But he was not a leader. Churchill was. Now let's go down to level 3. Level 3 is the winner.
I wanted to pick you up on something right there.
Yes.
You said Chamberlain was not a leader. So it's clear that on the scale of basic purposes, sometimes we have, so to speak, square holes and square pegs and round holes.
Yes.
Certain individuals who are not natural leaders,
That's right.
leading nations, leading societies, leading organizations, and things go amiss. But where would you put, individuals like the likes of, I would say, historical individuals like Napoleon Bonaparte and Alexander the Great in terms of the scale?
Alexander the Great was a leader. His goal was conquest. Everything we know about him makes that perfectly clear. Napoleon, oddly enough, was a normal. Yes, he was a general. Yes, he was a brilliant general, and he made himself emperor. So you could say, well, isn't that a leader? Well, in terms of his job description, yes. But in terms of his basic purpose, if you really look at him, he was a normal person. He was very different from Lincoln, from Churchill, from Alexander. He was a normal. Also, Ronald Reagan, very successful person, he was a normal. When you study these people, you have to study these people on a granular level to really be able to make this determination. It took me a long time to figure out that Napoleon was a normal. I'll give you somebody else who's a normal. You know the movie The Godfather?
I know the movie.
Okay. So The Godfather, the character The Godfather, was based on an actual real person called Carlo Gambino. Carlo Gambino was of the Gambino crime family. The family was named after him. And everybody who knows the mafia agrees he was the most successful of all the mafia dons. He was a normal. He lived in my neighborhood. He never lived in a mansion. He never owned a limousine. He was like a regular guy. You'd see him walking around the neighborhood. He went to the same church that I played baseball for. He was a normal. Now, did he commit crimes? Of course. And I'm not condoning what he did. But you would think, well, wasn't he a criminal? Well, again, his job description was that. But as a person, he lived in a normal house. He sent his son to the same college I went to. He had a normal marriage. He was a normal. And that's why they were never able to convict him of anything, because he was much smarter than most of the mafia people. Now, the inheritor of that family, of the Gambino crime was John Gotti. John Gotti died in prison. You know why? He was at level 6. He was a much lower level person. He did not want to fit in. And if you listen to what all the people have to say about Gambino, of course, he knew everybody. I mean, there are photographs of him with Frank Sinatra. My father knew him. Okay. He was a very congenial person. He'd say, hello, how are you? You having a nice day? So He was not scary. I mean, I have met mafia guys who were scary guys. He was not like that. He was just like the next door neighbor. He was a normal. So
Interesting.
he
I
didn't do,
have
he didn't
two
do
names
drugs.
to add to the list.
What's that?
I have two names to add to the list for you to analyze, but it's interesting your analysis of Garty and Gambino
Mm-hmm.
successor, like way different from his predecessor. And
Yes.
yeah, we did see the dynamics and how Garty got into a lot of trouble.
Yeah. So let
And
me
it's
tell you the
interesting
story
that
about
you
this.
actually knew these guys in person.
I didn't know Gotti and I didn't know Gambino. My father knew Gambino. He
Wow.
lived in his neighborhood. Everybody knew where he lived. Everybody knew what car he drove. They couldn't get anything on him. He was too smart because he was a normal guy. If you observe Gotti, Gotti was not a normal. You know, if you look at Gotti, he was overweight. He wore custom-made suits. He drove fancy cars.
Extravagant, highly flashy.
That's what you get from somebody at level 6. That's not what you got from Gambino. Now, Gambino made clear that when he died, his cousin was going to take over the family from him. His cousin, like him, was a very smart man. He was like a businessman. You know, he wasn't like the way you would think of a thug or a criminal like Gotti was, okay? So Gambino died in his beautiful home of a heart condition when he was, I think, 76. And his cousin took over. Gotti murdered the cousin who took over so that he could become the boss. It's a very famous murder. So Gambino was smart enough to pass it on to somebody like him, who was like a businessman. He acted like a businessman, you know, as opposed to Gotti. Gotti was, the FBI made audio tapes of Gotti for years. Okay, that's how they convicted him. They had him on tape saying all kinds of things. Now, I have heard many of those tapes. It's perfectly obvious from those tapes that Gotti was a dumb thug. That's what he was, okay? He was a vulgar, violent person. That's not what Carlo Gambino was like. And that's not what his cousin was like. That's how Gotti took over. He murdered his boss so that he could take his job. That's how that happened, that you got somebody who was at level 6. Because Carlo Gambino never would have turned the family over to somebody like that. He was too smart for that. So can I go on with the scale?
I wanted to throw in two important names. Let's go
Yes.
to South America. But I like what you said about Gambino being smart and choosing a good successor. It's, links, aligns with one of my philosophies that says there is no success without a successor. It's succession planning is actually very, very important. But the two names that come to my mind right now from South America are Fidel Castro and Che Guevara. Interesting characters.
Right. Well, I have not studied either of those persons long enough to determine their basic purposes. So I don't have an answer for you. If you want to know, Castro is dead, right? I believe.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yes.
And Guevara they're both dead. So if I knew it, I would tell you because they're dead, because I don't give the levels of live people because it's unethical. But I don't know because I would have to study it. For example, I have studied at great length George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Alexander Hamilton. So I know their levels from studying them. But I know who those people are, in a general way. But if I were to get some biographies of those two people and read them, I could probably give you a definitive answer.
Okay, that's right. Maybe another day we could explore their characters.
But I will tell you that as far as people who are important in my life, I know their levels. I know the basic purpose of every president of the United States, going back as far as Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and many of the previous ones who I studied, such as Lincoln and Washington and Jefferson. So that's
Jefferson was on my mind. Jefferson and Richard Nixon.
Yeah, again, I didn't study Nixon closely, but I do know that he was a normal. He was at level 4. And again, if you observe his behavior, he used to eat cottage cheese with ketchup on it. That's like what a normal would eat,
JFK.
JFK. Well, I hesitate to give that because he's like a sainted person, and I have a high opinion of him, and many other people do. So I don't know that I've never revealed what I know about him because he has a special place in America because she was murdered. But I will tell you who murdered him and what his level was. He was murdered by Lyndon Baines Johnson, his vice president. There's a whole book out about it. Johnson did to Kennedy exactly what Gotti did to his boss. He murdered him and took his job. So I can tell you, Lyndon Baines Johnson was at level 7. He was a subversive.
Whoa. That is...
Look at what came out of him.
That is wild. How is a subversive individual able to climb so high the ranks of society?
Hitler was a subversive. He was at level 7. He took over Germany. It's not like these people don't take over. They just do it in a different way. I mean, JFK was beloved. He was admired, highly intelligent, charismatic person, a bona fide war hero. I mean, they made a movie about his becoming a war hero. It was a big deal. But Johnson was nothing like that. Johnson, and we know a lot about these people, he was a corrupt criminal. I mean, I'm not saying criminal level 6. He was responsible for the 58,000 American soldiers who were killed in Vietnam. Kennedy was about to pull the people out of Vietnam, and that's one of the reasons that he was killed. Because the aerospace industry didn't want that. Well, guess what? Johnson was very close to the aerospace industry. And by getting rid of Kennedy, they made billions and billions of dollars from all those bombs that they made that were used in Vietnam. Anyway.
Wow, that's a lot to unpack. One last person, George Bush Sr.
Who?
George Bush Sr.
George Bush Sr. is a normal. Yeah. I mean, if you just observe and pay attention, he's a fairly typical normal person. There's nothing outlandish about him. He had a very conventional presidency. So anyway, we were talking about level 3. The winner is feathering his nest. He wants wealth. Now, whatever wealth means to him, obviously that means money, but it could also mean trophy wives. It could also mean, if he's an actor, an Oscar that he can put on his mantle. If he's a baseball player, it could be a World Series ring that he would get to wear for the rest of his life, show that he won the World Series. So that's what they're about. So they're not content to fit in. They want to stand out. So Jefferson was a winner. Study the man. Boy, did he win. He won and won and won and won and won. He didn't fight the British. When the British finally got to Monticello, which is quite a bit inland, he ran away. He didn't fight them. So that's what you get from a winner. He doesn't want to conquer. He just wants to win. It's a different thing. As far as level 4, the normal. This is the largest demographic group. The purpose of the normal is conformity. Now, you might say, well, conformity is not a good thing. Well, think of it this way. The normal wants to fit in. If everybody grows a mustache, he grows a mustache. When everybody shaves off their mustaches, he shaves it off. If everybody drives an SUV, he gets an SUV. If SUVs go out and people go back to sedans, he'll get rid of it and he'll get a sedan because he wants to fit in. This guy is not going to rock the boat. He doesn't want to hurt anybody and he doesn't want to help anybody. So this is your average person who in the United States, he has a house with a mortgage. He has a car with car payments. He's got a wife. He's got some kids. He takes a vacation for 2 weeks in the summer to some ordinary place like Florida or Hawaii. This is somebody who wants to fit in. Now, he may not actually fit in perfectly, but that's what he wants. So that's the normal. Then we get down to the loser. Now, this is the last one that I figured out from these because it's bizarre. The purpose of the loser is to suffer. This makes no sense to most people. Why would a person's purpose be to suffer? Well, we don't really have to know that, but they're there. So think of all the people who kill themselves with drugs, with alcohol, with unsafe driving, with bad relationships, with overeating. I mean, there's a million ways you can make yourself suffer. So this is the type of guy who'll be in a bad relationship and his friends or relatives or his therapist try to get him out of it. And he won't. He's going to stay in it because he's going to make himself suffer. Well, I'm sure you've known some people like that.
Exactly.
And there's nothing you can do about it.
There's nothing you can tell them.
If that guy were to get this book and spot himself at that level, he might be able to move himself up to level 4. Now he's about conformity. That does occasionally happen. So you could see some guy who's wrecking his life and somehow he gets out of it and he becomes a normal person. Well, he moved up one level. But that's pretty rare because people don't usually change on this scale. Once a person is at a level in this scale, that's usually where he stays. Because it takes a big deal, because you have to reverse your polarity. You see, the loser is pulling suffering in on himself. That's an inflow. Whereas the normal, he's outflowing. He's getting a job. He's buying a house. He's getting a wife. He's raising. It's all outflow. So it's a reversal of polarity. So it's a very big lift to move up on the scale. Although you do see people move down on it when they have terrible things happen to them. So very often you'll have like a couple, and let's say the kid gets abducted and murdered. They're crushed. Their relationship is ruined. You know why? They go downscale. They can't cope with it. Now, some people might be able to cope with it through therapy or prayer or whatever they do, meditation. But very often when people have something really bad happen like that, they go down to a lower level. So you can have a guy who's a normal guy. He works a normal job, lives in a normal home with a normal family, drives a normal car. Something terrible happens, like his house burns down with his family in it. He becomes an alcoholic. He becomes a drug addict. Then he becomes a homeless person. He's now at level 5. He's a loser. He's just making himself suffer. And you cannot talk him out of it. He would have to lift himself back up to level 4, which, as I said, is not an easy thing to do. So he's probably going to die at that level. Then we go to level 6, the criminal. Everybody recognizes this. There's thousands and thousands of movies made about criminals. You know, like Scarface with Al Pacino. Did you ever see that movie? It's about a criminal. So the criminal, his objective is pleasure. The criminal does not particularly want to kill you, but he will if you get in his way. So you have some crook, right? And he's got some, let's say he's dealing drugs, right? If you threaten that, he will have you killed. He wants to make that drug deal because he wants the $1 million so he can buy cocaine, wine, cuisine, palaces, limousines. See, it's all about pleasure for this guy. That's what motivates the criminal. So when you see somebody who's about pleasure, that's a criminal. So 7, which is the lowest level, is subversive. There are not many of these. The subversive, to subvert means to pull down or to destroy from within. His purpose is destruction. So that's what you get from somebody at this level. There aren't too many of them. Pol Pot was at this level. Look at what he did to Cambodia. He murdered thousands of innocent people for really no good reason. That's very different from somebody who goes to war for a good reason, like Lincoln. The South fired on Fort Sumter. They seceded from the Union, okay? And Lincoln's goal was primarily to preserve the Union, and he did. And he waited until they attacked the Union forces, and then he said, okay, you attacked us, now we're going to defend ourselves, which was very shrewd on his part. So it's very similar to in World War II, America was an isolationist nation, had a very small military. People in America felt they were protected by 2 vast oceans, which in 1939 really was a barrier, and friendly countries to the north and south. So if the Japanese had not attacked them in Pearl Harbor, the American people would not have voted to go to war. Well, after they were attacked, Roosevelt came out the next day and said, a state of war exists between us and Japan. And everybody in America said, yes, it does. And millions of guys signed up the next day, which was a Monday. They all went down and signed up to fight. That's different from what you get from Hitler, who tried to exterminate people he didn't like the Jews and the gypsies and the gays and the mentally retarded. That's different from defending yourself. So those are the 7 levels. Now, an important thing to understand about all of these scales is that there is an axis. The axis tells you, what are we measuring here? In other words, I can give you a piece of wood. That doesn't particularly help you. But if I mark on it inches, 1 inch, 2 inch, 3, then you can measure your fabric with it. Or a meter stick. See, it gives you a scale. That's what the axis is. It tells you, what are we measuring? Now, in the case of this scale, we are measuring at the top, courage, wisdom, and ethics. And at the bottom, fear, stupidity, and criminality. So the opposite of courage is fear. The opposite of wisdom is stupidity. And the opposite of ethics is criminality. So these 3 things, depending on where you are in the scale, correspond. So a person at level 1 has tremendous courage, tremendous wisdom, and tremendous ethics. So look at Jesus. He had tremendous courage, tremendous wisdom, and tremendous ethics. He was at level 1. Now I look at level 7, Hitler. This is a guy who lived with fear, stupidity, and criminality. You know, a lot is said about how evil he is, But you don't hear too much about how stupid he was. He did stupid things. I can tell you, as a serious student of military science, he did 6 or 8 things that were absolutely stupid. And his generals knew it. They told him not to do those things, and he did it anyway. You know why? Because he was stupid. Now, just because a person is a head of state doesn't mean he's not stupid. That's not news to a lot of people. I mean, a lot of people know that already. But a subversive is fearful, he's stupid, and he's a criminal. He does criminal things. So that's what you get from. So, for example, somebody at level 6, the level called criminal, he's not as fearful, not as stupid, and not as criminal as the subversive. So the subversive is the type of person who would be a war criminal, right? A person who in war commits horrific crimes. You know, like when they had the Nuremberg trials in 1945, and they tried 20 Nazis for war crimes. You know, those are very bad people. Now, only one of them showed remorse or regret, and they did not execute him. So I think 17, if I remember correctly, 17 of the 20 were hanged or sentenced to hang. Hermann Goering, who was the most prominent of those 17, got his hands on some cyanide and poisoned himself in his jail cell because he was a powerful, influential person and highly thought of by some people. So somebody slipped him a cyanide pill. So he didn't hang, although he was sentenced to hang. And Albert Speer got 20 years. He was not an evil person. He was a much more upscale person. So that's the axis, okay? Every scale has an axis. Now, this scale, notice at level 4, there is a horizontal line, and above that it says social, and below that it says antisocial. Level 4 is the dividing line between social persons and antisocial persons. So the loser is antisocial. The criminal is more antisocial, and the subversive is most antisocial. On the other end, the winner is social, the leader is more social, the saint is most social. And the normal is really not really social or antisocial. In other words, he doesn't particularly want to help anybody, and he doesn't particularly want to harm anybody. He's just getting his check, going on vacation, watching TV, plays golf. You know, that's the normal. He's not really social or antisocial. But in these other levels, you can see the winner, for example, is a person who generates a lot of wealth. Well, in doing so, he's employing people, isn't he? So you talk about the captain of industry. You know, it's a cliche, the captain of industry, right? So this guy, he employs 1,000 people. All those people are dependent upon this. So that's a winner. He's motivated to win. You know, there was a presidential candidate in 1992, a famous American named, I'm forgetting his name. He ran a 3-way race against Clinton and Bush. And I'm forgetting his name at the moment. He had become rich in the computer industry. And he famously said in one of the presidential interviews, I think, he said, if you're going to hire somebody who wants to win. So that's very smart. You see, that's what a smart businessman would do. You're looking for somebody who wants to win. So that person is motivated to help you to win in your company. I thought that was a very interesting comment. The other 2 guys didn't say that. They were at different levels. So,
are you talking about Ross Perot?
Yes, Ross Perot. Ross Perot. Yes, that's the guy. Thank you. How soon we forget. It's been 32 years since that happened. But anyway, And if you look on the right, you'll see it says superhuman, human, and subhuman. Now, this scale breaks down into 3 subgroups. People at level 1 and 2 are superhuman. People at level 3, 4, and 5 are human. People at 6 and 7 are subhuman. Now, let's talk about the subhuman. What makes them subhuman? If you see the horrible things that were done by Pol Pot and Hitler, it's pretty clear that they were subhuman. You know, you see these terrorists who murder innocent people. That's subhuman. Normal people won't do that. So the criminal and the subversive are subhuman. So if somebody's a professional criminal, he's probably a subhuman. That's what these people are about. Did you ever watch The Sopranos? TV show The Sopranos? It ran for, I think, 9 years, was very highly acclaimed, and it was about a mafia family. Well, most of the characters in that show were professional criminals, okay? They were mostly subhumans, and you could, when you watch the show, you could see the horrible things they did. Like one character, he found out that his mother's friend had some money hidden in her house. So he breaks into her house to steal the money, and when she caught him, he murdered her. Okay, that's what a subhuman would do. These are the type of people who are drug traffickers, slave traffickers, weapons traffickers. They're subhumans. Now, most of us are in the middle, level 3, 4, and 5. They're humans. Now, the winner is a little more upscale than the normal. The normal is a little upscale from the loser, but they're humans. They're not subhumans. And a good way to understand it is these people have a conscience. And then when you get up to the top, you have superhumans. These people have abilities that the rest of us don't have. For example, look at all the stories of Jesus. He made the blind see. He made the lame walk. He raised someone from the dead. He raised himself from the dead, right? Those are superhuman abilities. That's what you get from a superhuman. Or St. Francis of Assisi. It is known that he had some special rapport with animals. Animals just loved him. He could communicate with animals. So most of us can't do that. See, he was at level 1. He was a saint. I'm not saying he was the peer of Jesus. He probably wasn't, but he was at that level. So he was superhuman. So, or if you look at what Lincoln did with the Civil War, what Lincoln accomplished was considered impossible by most people at the time. He preserved the Union and ended slavery. Because what had been going on from the beginning of the country in 1789 was, well, if you try to get rid of our slaves, we'll leave the Union. That's what was going on. And so that's why when Lincoln was elected, South Carolina just said, we're seceding. And then all these other states joined them. They were not going to allow their degraded behavior to be stopped. You're not going to take our slaves away from us. Well, what Lincoln did was superhuman. He conquered them, he preserved the Union, and he ended slavery, which is the biggest event in American history. So he clearly was superhuman. He wasn't a saint, he was a leader. And again, if you study him, it's fairly obvious that he was a leader in the deepest sense of the word. So that's what the scale is about. Any question?
No questions. For now, I really appreciate, like I always say about you, how you break things down in the most simplicity form. But if I were to have a question, I think it would be between these skills. Sometimes, for example, you see certain persons who have both the attribute of a leader and a winner. And somebody who comes to my mind is the current president of the United States, Donald Trump.
Right.
He's
Well,
quite
I know,
wealthy
I
and
know
he
exactly
likes
what
to
level he's
conquer.
at, exactly what level he's at. I'm not going to tell you because it would be unethical. Now, after he dies, then I would tell you what level he's at. But I have been aware of Donald Trump for 50 years because I grew up in New York. He was the most famous person in New York. You know, the mayors would come and go, the councilmen would come and go, the senators would come and go, but Donald Trump was always there. So he was almost like the king of New York. And he was in the papers every day. We turn on TV, there he is again. I mean, everything he did, you know, everything he did was covered by the news. That's how famous he was. So before he got into politics, he was a very popular person. You know, the Clintons, Bill and Hillary, went to his wedding when he married his current wife, Melania. I mean, how is that? The President of the United States and the First Lady come to your wedding. You know, that's giving you a
Influence.
gift. Yeah. So again, I tell everybody, never tell anyone the level of any person on any scale if it's a living person. If you want to tell dead people, which I often do for illumination, that's fine. But if the person is alive, don't tell levels. And that includes yourself. If you figure out where you are on the scale, I'm not telling you to tell anybody. Don't do it. If your wife or your girlfriend or your mother wants to know, give her the book. She can figure it out herself. If she figures it out, that's good. And I say she shouldn't tell anybody. Now, maybe it'll be one of these things where you know, and she knows, and you know that she knows, and she knows that you know, but you don't say anything about it. Well, however, when you're talking about marriage, marriage is a special thing. If you have somebody you're close to like that, you might divulge something like this. But that would be telling somebody your level on any scale is much more intimate than getting in bed with them. You're telling them who you are as a being, as a person. You're telling them what you're all about. You're turning yourself inside out to that. That's why this is so powerful. You know, often now Donald Trump has been in the politics now for 9 years, which is almost 10 years now. And I have observed, and you may have too, that people are often surprised at things he does and things he says. They're surprised. I'm never surprised at anything he does. Because I understand him. Because I know where he is on these scales. He's not a hard person to understand because he tells you whatever he thinks. You know, he's not tight-lipped. Some people are harder to figure out than others. But if you really know the material and you study the person, you can figure it out. So, for example, you asked me about Che Guevara. I'm sure if I read a biography or maybe a couple of biographies of him, or maybe watch some documentaries, if there are any good ones, that I'd be able to tell you where he is on the scale. You know, but that doesn't mean I would. Well, he's dead now, so I guess I could say it. But I never give anybody's level. Because, remember I told you, when you find a level, you have a realization. If you tell the person, you're taking that away from him, which is not a good thing. So let's say the wife sees that the guy is at a certain level. She shouldn't tell him. She should just skim the book and say, where are you on the scale? You don't have to tell me, but you figure it out. See, and he does. He can figure out where he is, and then he understands himself better. I'm not saying you should tell the wife. Now, maybe if they're very close, they might want to do that. You know, like I'm very close to my son, and so I know his level on this scale, and he knows that I know his level on this scale. You know, so because we're so close, it's an exception. Because there are no secrets between us anyway. But other than that, especially in public. You should never divulge somebody's level. Let the person figure it out. You know, I get this all the time. Tell me what level I'm at on this scale. I'm not going to do it. It's just like, I would have clients come into me and ask me things, you think I should marry this woman? I'm not going to tell that guy if he should marry this woman or not. I might have a clear idea in my mind. I might be thinking, oh, this guy doesn't marry this crazy woman. I might be thinking that, but I'm not going to tell anybody that. That's not my job. My job is to get the guy to figure it out himself. I had a client once who was in a really bad marriage. They got divorced. So I'm working with this guy, and this is a very successful, upscale person. So he had this big realization about his wife. It was not a happy realization. You know what I'm saying? He told me something that his father had warned him about this woman. He said, don't marry that person. And he did it anyway. Wrecked his life. But he did not extricate himself from it because of where he was on this scale. So, it was a very unhappy situation. That happens. We have these tragedies all the time that go on in life, terrible things. People allow marriages to wreck their lives. How many people are in abusive relationships? The husband gets drunk, he beats up the wife, the police arrest him, and she refuses to testify. And she doesn't get a divorce. So next year, when the Super Bowl is on, he gets drunk and he beats her up again. So, she's probably at level 5, loser. That's how she's suffering. That would explain why she stays in it. So, instead of being a drug addict or drunk or a glutton, she's in an abusive relationship. That's her version of suffering. So
I guess my only question right now would be, is it possible to have an individual that is borderline between two scales?
Between two levels, you mean?
Yeah, yes, two levels rather on the scale.
On a quantum scale, no. On a gradual scale, yes. So you'll see if we go forward with this, we'll get to a scale, say gradual, and there's like an infinitude of gradations. You can be, not only can you be at 3.0, you can be 3.1, 3.2, 3.3, 3.4, 3.5, 3. All the way up till you get to the next level. And then,
on a linear scale.
What's that?
On a linear scale.
It's not a question of being linear. It's a question of it being quantum or gradual.
Okay.
It's a different function. So if it's a quantum scale, there's nothing in between. He's one or the other. And if it's a gradual
scale,
people are very often in between. You'll see a person, very often I'll see this in my clients, that the guy is on his way from level 4 to level 3. He hasn't gotten to level 3 yet, but he's on his way. And then one day click, he's at the new level and he has this big realization and his life changes. But, in between, there were like little changes going on. That's different from a quantum scale. Quantum scale, you leap from level to level. And if you actually get the book and study the scales, it's explained how and why. This is not hard to understand why this is. You can actually look at it and say, well, it makes sense to me that this is a gradual scale. And you could think about people yeah, this guy was at this level, and then he got a little better, and then but that doesn't happen with this scale. It's quantum.
Just like you flip the switch and you hit a sudden realization.
That's right. Now, just so you understand, let's say you have a guy who's meditating, right? He's at level 2. Meditating. After 30 years of meditation, he goes up to level 1. Now, was he making progress in meditation? Yes. But he was still a leader. And then something happens and says, I'm a saint. He reversed his polarity. Instead of being outflowing, now he's inflowing. It's a different way of life. It's a different type of person. And you can sometimes see this in people, where a guy is outflow, and all of a sudden that all stops, and he's into inflow. He either went up a level or down a level. So that the polarity helps you to spot what the person is at. See, like if you look at Donald Trump, is he outflowing or is he inflowing? I don't think that's subtle. I mean, it's pretty clear to me which of those it is, and I'm not going to say what it is. But you can look at it. So as opposed to Alexander Hamilton. Alexander Hamilton was a level 2. Boy, did he outflow. Outflow, 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 outflow. I mean, he was really a powerhouse of outflow. And if you study his life, which I did, it's not subtle. It's crystal clear. This guy was outflowing all the time. Well, that's part of the reason why Jefferson couldn't stand him. You know, that's a very domineering type of personality, you know, outflow, outflow, outflow. As opposed to somebody like Jesus or Gandhi, they were inflowing. See, they were withdrawing from the world. So, different purpose. When your purpose changes, your polarity changes. When your polarity changes, there's an observable difference in your behavior. So you can see it. So, you know, you see some guys like a regular guy, normal guy, you know, and then you see him 5 years later and he's joined some religious order. It's like a completely different person. He might have changed level on this scale. So I think I answered your question.
Very, very well. Do I move to the next?
Wait a minute. Let's not go to the next one because we've been doing this for an hour and a half.
And that
next,
is a whole class on its own.
Right. Because each one of these scales is unique. So when we get to the next one, I'll be happy to do this again for the next one, but we'll need time. But in case you haven't noticed, people need to eat, they need to sleep, they need to pay their bills, and I'm a normal person with all of that like everyone else. At some point, I'm going to have to eat. At some point, I'm going to have to go to sleep. And then I start again tomorrow, you know. So I can't just do this forever. But if you want to keep doing this for every single scale, I'll do it. It's just going to take some time.
Fantastic. That's perfect. And once again, cannot thank you enough. Words are insufficient to express my gratitude to you for your time again. And from me, it is much love and respect to you. God bless you. And of course, we hope to see you again very, very soon. So at the back end, we'll try to do the scheduling and we will see you soon.
Okay, Dems. Have a great day.
Yeah, of course, you too.
Yes, sir.